Welcome to The Author Show, where we present new authors and books. From fiction to self-help and everything in between, you'll find it all here. To watch the TV version of our program, visit authorswebtv.com. That's authorswebtv.com. And now, let the show begin.
Hello and welcome back to the show. This is your host, Don McCauley. Today we're welcoming to the program author Gwen Mayo, and she is the author of Concealed in Ash. Gwen, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
I'm a transplanted Floridian. I grew up in Kentucky, mostly in the hills of the eastern part of the state. Spent about 20 years in Lexington and then had to relocate to Florida to take care of a family member who was reaching the end of his life.
So tell us about your book.
Concealed in Ash literally involves a fire which burns the Phoenix Hotel in Lexington, Kentucky in 1879. And a murdered man is found in the ashes of it. It's a very compelling mystery, has a lot of influence by both the Klan and the Red Strings, who were competing factions of the number of secret societies that were going on in Kentucky at the time.
So who did you write your book for specifically?
People who love history, particularly obscure history, the kind of stuff you're not going to get from just anyone. If you read one of my books, it's going to be in a place and a time that couldn't have existed anywhere else except in that one spot because of the political and social things going on around it.
Now, could you say there's any type of central message or perhaps underlying theme that runs throughout your book?
I think that you'll find that the books take on the social climate of the times, and it's a very close parallel to the times we're living in now. So if you're interested in why people do the things they do, it has a compelling message for you.
Now, if you had to choose, what would you say is the single most important idea you're sharing in your book that's really going to add value to the reader's life?
I think the idea that people are the same no matter where they are. That's kind of a central theme to what I write. It doesn't matter what century you're in or what type of political outlook you have. The basic human nature is always going to be the same.
If you could compare your book with any book out there we might already be familiar with, which book would it be and why?
Just about any of Anne Perry's monk novels kind of follow the same themes. They're looking at social justice. They're talking about the dark side of human nature. They deal with the very violent and sometimes evil people in the world, and they have that sense of the dark values. Of course, these are very American books, but I think that probably the characters are very similar.
Give us a little bit more regarding the storyline of this book.
Well, this body is found in the ashes of the hotel along with about 7 other bodies, but this one has clearly been shot to death rather than dying in the fire. In trying to find out who this is and why they were shot, the character runs into a situation where someone very close to them could have been the killer. So you're dealing with this problem of wanting to solve the mystery, but at the same time, not wanting it to be this person that looks really guilty.
Now, do all of your books stand on their own, or is there a connection between them?
The books will stand on their own. If there's a connection between them, it's the continuation of the characters, and those character arcs will kind of go from one book to the next because no one remains static. The things that happen to you change you.
What do you feel that you owe the real people upon whom you base your characters?
I think I owe them an honest portrayal. I tend to get as much background information as I can about the real people who are in the book. In this case, there was a general who lived next door to the hotel who also lost his house to the fire, but he opened up his lawn to the people who were trying to evacuate the hotel and set up many clinic there, taking care of them. And I wanted to make sure that that got into the text because it was a very important part of the story of this fire.
How much research goes into your books, and how do you do that?
A lot of research goes into my books. I usually start out with one of the Nessa Donnelly mysteries in the Kentucky room at the Lexington Library. They have an excellent collection of historic documents there. I was unfortunate enough in the middle of this book to have discovered something that happened and couldn't find a date for it, and the Kentucky room flooded and all of the information there was shipped to Chicago. So I had to drive to Frankfurt to the State Archives to do the research there and was lucky enough to find it there because the Kentucky room is a much better resource.
So in your experience, what's the most difficult thing about writing characters from the opposite sex?
Trying to get the mannerisms right. Men and women don't sit the same. They don't walk the same. and to get those details that give the character their personalities. Also, men tend to speak in shorter sentences. They're much briefer than women. We are more language oriented. So as a rule, you have to watch that you're not giving them long speeches because they just don't do that.
So what are the ethics of writing about historical figures?
It's really important with historical figures to not violate what's already known about them. I was using a prostitute by the name of Belle Breezing, who was a very famous madam. She was the character that they based Belle Watling in the Gone with the Wind book on. And to be accurate to her, there's an enormous number of stories in her background that are public knowledge, including the fact that she was in court with a group of other prostitutes, and the judge asked her what her occupation was, because women had to have an occupation if they weren't married. And she told him she was a prostitute. All the other women had said they were seamstresses. And he laughed and asked her how business was. And she replied to him that it was plumb awful. She had to compete with all these seamstresses. So that gives you an insight to their personality, and you can't violate that when you're writing because it's part of the common knowledge.
What's been your hardest scene to write?
There was a scene that dealt with the Knights of the Golden Circle in the book that was the predecessor to this one, Circle of Dishonor. And in that scene, the Knights of the Golden Circle had sworn an oath that if one of them violated the trust of the group, that they would have their heads cut off and a lantern made of the skull. This was a historical fact. I couldn't get around it, so I had to write a scene where somebody had betrayed them. And that was very difficult for me because I didn't want to go too far into gore, and it was a really gory thing that they did.
Now, did your environment or upbringing play a role in your writing at all?
Well, I think growing up in the Appalachian area, you get a sense of history. So I think that part of it I picked up from my upbringing. But I really, when I was studying politics and history, developed a strong interest in the time period that's referred to as the Decades of Discord, because that's just a wonderful period of everything that could possibly go wrong to make a situation worse happen to Kentucky. And it really captured my imagination.
What can you tell us about your genre and why you prefer to write in that genre?
I write historical mysteries, and I prefer that because you're dealing with a time when we didn't have the DNA evidence, the ability to tell you what kind of gun fired a particular bullet. The best you could do was what caliber the bullet was. When you have all of the scientific stuff coming in later, it takes away from the ability of a detective to solve a crime. You're not dealing on the mental capacity of the person, but rather on the science and technology, and I like the historicals for that reason.
What's been your most rewarding experience since publishing your work?
I actually think the most rewarding experience was to go back to my hometown and do a signing there at the library and donate the proceeds from the book sales to the library, because that was great. It got to expand a library that's young and struggling. When I was growing up, there was no library in Grayson, so going back there and donating books for the children was a great thing.
How would you describe your writing style?
I think I build puzzles in a way that's very close to Agatha Christie's. I know before I start writing the book who did it and why they did it, and how the detective figures it out. And once you have that down, the rest of the plot will fall into place. So I think the writing style is very close to that. I keep notebooks and journals on what I'm doing and which characters have been in it, who's real and who isn't.
Now, who or what would you say influenced your writing the most?
Probably Agatha Christie influenced me the most. I grew up reading her books. They were one of the few things that you could purchase in the local grocery store, because we also had no bookstore in this tiny town I grew up in. So there was a rack of books at the grocery, and I started reading them there probably when I was about 9 or 10, because I'd run out of things in the library, and they wouldn't let me move to an older age group to read stuff. So I was forced to save up money and buy them. Usually 1 or 2 a month was all I could get.
So based on your experience as a writer, what's the one recommendation you would make to authors just starting out?
I would recommend they read, and read voraciously. The more you read of what other people write, the better feel you have for language and how to use it. I had a creative writing professor who used to use the term furnishing the mind. All of that stuff you're putting into your head is actually creating the furniture that you're going to be resting your plots on.
If you had to choose, would you say you're more of a character artist or more a plot-driven writer?
Definitely plot-driven. I think strong characters are important, and every book is about the character and what they're doing. But with a mystery, you need a strong plot. You need to know where it's going and how it's put together, because otherwise you're just kind of wandering aimlessly.
In your opinion, who should buy this book?
Anyone who loves history will enjoy these books. If you like the obscure history, you'll enjoy it even more, because I don't write about places or things that everybody else is writing about. Kentucky in this time period was a series of little kingdoms, and it depended where you were, who was running it. And there was a huge government vacuum going on. So all of that historical stuff, if you like to know why people do things and how it influences how we think today, because the importance of the state to the Civil War is massive. Lincoln didn't believe he could win without Kentucky. At the same time, the South was courting Kentucky, and we ended up splitting the state in half and having two state legislatures, one in Bowling Green and one in Frankfort, and an amazing conflict with belonging to both and neither side of the war. Kentucky was so split up that it was occupied by the military for about 4 years after the war, and then for the next 20 years was struggling with who they were as a state again.
Do you have a website?
Yes, I do. It's gwenmayo.com.
Could you spell your name for us, please?
GwenMayo.
Well, this has been just great. Our guest today has been Gwen Mayo, and she's the author of Concealed in Ash. Gwen, thanks very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
This is Don McCauley wrapping up another edition of The Author Show. Please share this interview with your family and friends so that they too may have the opportunity to discover our guest and her work. And why not spread the word on social media? We look forward to you joining us next time for another great book and another great author on The Author Show.
Thanks for listening to The Author Show. To contact us, call toll-free 1-877-955-8800. That's 877-55-8800. Or visit theauthorshow.com. Theauthorshow.com. Tune in next time to another great author on The Author Show.